On the night of November 24, 1971, a Boeing 727 cut through a violent storm over the Pacific Northwest. Inside the cabin, turbulence shook everything loose. Overhead bins rattled. Lights flickered slightly. Outside the windows, only darkness and rain. At the very back of the aircraft, a man stood up. No one stopped him. No one noticed him at first. He moved slowly toward the rear stairs. In his hand, a parachute. In the other, a bag containing $200,000 in cash. The aircraft was flying at low altitude now. The conditions were unstable. And that's exactly how he wanted it. For a few seconds, everything went quiet. No announcements. No screams. Just the sound of wind pressing against metal. Then, the rear stairs opened. Cold air rushed into the cabin. And the man stepped into the night. No hesitation. No looking back. Seconds later, he disappeared into the storm. And was never seen again. To understand how this happened, we have to go back. Not to the jump, but to the man himself. Thanksgiving Eve, 1971. Portland International Airport was crowded beyond capacity. Families, travelers, holiday rush chaos. Yet among all of them, one man moved differently. Not because he drew attention, but because he didn't. He blended in completely. Mid-40s. Clean appearance. Neutral expression. No visible nervousness. No unusual behavior. He carried no suitcase. Only a single briefcase. At the Northwest Orient counter, he paid cash. No ID checks like today. No digital records. Just a paper ticket. Destination, Seattle. Name written on the ticket. Dan Cooper. A name that would later become one of the most debated mistakes in FBI history. But at that moment, it meant nothing. He was just another passenger. Or so it seemed. Seat 18C. Rear section of a Boeing 727. A design that would later become critical to this entire case. The aircraft had a unique feature. A rear stair. A detail most passengers never thought about. But Cooper did. After takeoff, he ordered a bourbon and soda, lit a cigarette, looked out the window, and waited. Flight attendants described him later in one word. Unremarkable. But that word would not last long. Because somewhere above the clouds, he was no longer just a passenger. He was preparing something no one on board could imagine. Minutes after takeoff, Flight 305 was finally stable. Passengers relaxed into their seats. Some read newspapers. Others talked quietly. A normal short flight between Portland and Seattle. Only a few dozen minutes in the air. Nothing unusual. But in the rear section of the cabin, something very unusual was about to happen. The man in seat 18C slowly reached into his jacket pocket. No sudden movement. No sign of urgency. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper. Then he leaned slightly toward the flight attendant. Florence Schaffner. At first, she didn't think much of it. This wasn't rare. Passengers often handed notes. Phone numbers. Messages. Small personal gestures. She accepted it without hesitation. And slipped it into her pocket without reading it. A small moment. Completely ordinary. But the man didn't look away. He stayed calm. Watching. Waiting. Inside the cockpit of Flight 305, a decision was now unfolding that would shape the entire case. The crew relayed Cooper's demands to air traffic control. And from there, The message reached airline executives, then law enforcement, then the FBI. Very quickly, the situation escalated from a suspicious onboard threat into a full federal hijacking case. There was no precedent for something like this playing out mid-flight with this level of control. The aircraft was still in the air. Passengers were still on board. And a man with an unknown device was still sitting at the rear of the cabin. Time was no longer just important. It was critical. On the ground, the FBI faced an immediate dilemma: refuse the demands and risk the safety of everyone on board, or comply and hope to regain control later. There was no perfect option, only damage control. They chose to cooperate. Bank employees were urgently assembled, not in a controlled environment, but under pressure. Cash had to be gathered quickly. Every bill counted. Every serial number recorded manually. $200,000 in 1971 money. A significant amount for the time. The process was slow, and time was running out. At the same time, another operation was unfolding. Parachutes had to be located. Not one, not two, but four. This detail immediately stood out to investigators. Why four? Why insist on redundancy? No one had a clear answer. But no one could afford to question it too deeply. Not right now. The parachutes were collected from different sources. Some from civilian skydiving centers, others from military surplus. They were rushed together, checked quickly, and prepared for delivery. But even then, there was uncertainty. If he was experienced, he might notice flaws. If he was not, he might still succeed. Either way, the risk remained. Back inside Flight 305, the passengers remained unaware. They continued their journey as if nothing unusual was happening. Some noticed the aircraft circling longer than expected. Others assumed weather delays. None of them knew they were part of a federal hijacking negotiation happening in real time. No announcements were made. No panic spread through the cabin. Only silence and normalcy, covering something far from normal. Hours passed. The aircraft continued to circle above the Seattle area. Fuel levels were monitored. Ground teams prepared for landing. And every minute that passed increased the pressure on everyone involved. Finally, the aircraft was cleared to land. Seattle-Tacoma Airport came into view. But the plane did not approach the terminal. Instead, it taxied to a remote, isolated section of the runway. Far from passengers. Far from public view. Surrounded by emergency vehicles positioned at a distance. Lights flashing. But no movement forward. Not yet. The exchange began. Slow. Controlled. Carefully coordinated. The ransom was delivered. The parachutes were delivered. Every instruction followed exactly as demanded. No deviation. No confrontation. Then one by one, the passengers were released. They stepped off the aircraft safely. Confused. Unaware. Relieved. They had no idea what had just happened behind them. And they would only learn the truth later, when their flight became national news. Inside the aircraft, only a few remained. The crew, and the man in seat 18C. Now, the situation was no longer about negotiation. It was about what came next. The passengers were gone, but the flight was not over. Only 4 crew members remained on board. Captain William Scott, First Officer William Ratakzak, Flight Engineer Harold Anderson, and Flight Attendant Tina Mucklow. The cabin now felt different. Not crowded. Not noisy. just empty enough to feel every sound, every movement, every second. Cooper remained in seat 18C, calm as ever, as if nothing significant had changed. The ransom had been delivered. The parachutes were on board. The aircraft was now under his complete control. But what came next was something no one on the crew had fully anticipated. He began issuing new instructions, each one precise, each one deliberate. First, the altitude, 10,000 feet, low enough to reduce complications during a jump. Then the speed, slow, around 170 knots, a speed that would keep the aircraft stable, but still allow a controlled exit. Then the landing gear, down, a drag increase that made the aircraft less efficient, but more predictable. Then the flaps, 15 degrees, adjusting airflow and stability. And finally, the cabin pressure, left unsealed, unpressurized. This detail changed everything. It meant one thing only: the rear exit could be used in flight. And Cooper knew it. To the crew, these were not random requests. They were calculated. Each instruction aligned perfectly with one outcome: a parachute jump from a Boeing 727. At night, in storm conditions, over dense terrain. At some point during this phase, Cooper instructed Tina Mucklow to join him briefly. She complied. He spoke calmly, without aggression, without emotion. And then, he asked her to return to the cockpit and close the door behind her. That moment changed the dynamic inside the aircraft. From that point on, no one would directly observe him again. The aircraft continued flying into the night. Over Washington State. Darkness below. Rain across the windshield. Wind pushing against the frame. Inside the cockpit, silence. Not calm silence. Tense silence. The kind that builds over time, without anyone noticing until it becomes unbearable. Then time began to slow. Not literally, but perceptually. Minutes felt longer. Every sound felt sharper. Every vibration more noticeable. The crew monitored instruments closely, but nothing unusual appeared on screen. Only the knowledge that something was about to happen. At approximately 8:13 p.m., a subtle shift occurred. The aircraft's balance changed slightly. A movement at the rear. A change in airflow. Indicators suggested the rear air stair had been deployed. But no one could confirm it visually. Not from the cockpit. Not safely. And then? Nothing. No alarm. No announcement. No final instruction. Just silence. The aircraft continued flying exactly as ordered. Over mountains. Through storm clouds. Into darkness. Nearly 2 hours later, Flight 305 landed in Reno. Emergency crews were already waiting. The aircraft was secured immediately. And then, the search began. Every seat checked. Every compartment inspected. The rear stairs examined. The result was immediate. And impossible to ignore. He was gone. The money was gone. The parachutes were gone. But there was no sign of how or when he left. Only one fact remained certain. Somewhere between Seattle and Reno, D.B. Cooper had stepped out of an aircraft into the night and disappeared. The moment Flight 305 landed in Reno, the situation shifted again. From a hijacking to a disappearance. Armed agents boarded the aircraft immediately. Every seat was checked. Every compartment inspected. The rear stairs examined carefully. But the result was already clear. There was no sign of him. No parachute attached to the aircraft. No trace of forced exit inside the cabin. Just an empty seat. And a mystery that had already escaped into the night. Within hours, the FBI launched a massive search operation. At the time, it was one of the most extensive aerial and ground searches ever conducted for a hijacking case. They believed Cooper could not have gone far. Not in those conditions. Search aircraft swept across the suspected drop zone, flying low over forests, rivers, mountain ridges. Helicopters followed difficult terrain paths. Ground teams moved through dense woodland and steep slopes. Every possible landing area was examined. Every stretch of land was considered. But the results never changed. No parachute. No body. No equipment. Nothing. Only silence across miles of wilderness. As days turned into weeks, a difficult reality began to emerge. If Cooper had survived the jump, he had vanished without leaving a trace, with the physical search producing almost nothing. Investigators turned to evidence. The first major item was the tie. A simple black clip-on tie left behind on his seat. At first glance, it seemed insignificant. But decades later, advanced forensic analysis revealed microscopic particles embedded in its fibers. Particles linked to industrial materials. Some consistent with specialized manufacturing environments, including aerospace-related components. But even this discovery could not identify him, only suggest possibilities. Then there were the cigarettes, smoked calmly during the flight, collected afterward, and then lost before modern DNA testing became available. A small detail, with massive potential, gone before it could be fully used. And then, the money. Every bill had been recorded. Serial numbers documented. Tracked across financial systems. If even a portion entered circulation, it should have been found. But it wasn't. For years, almost none of it appeared. As if it had vanished completely, along with the man who took it. Then, in 1980, a new piece of the puzzle surfaced. A discovery that changed everything. And nothing. A child digging along the Columbia River unearthed bundles of decaying $20 bills. They matched the ransom. But they raised more questions than answers. How did they get there? Why only a small portion? Why here? Why then? No explanation fully satisfied investigators. The search had ended. But the mystery had not. And with every unanswered question, the case of D.B. Cooper grew larger than the crime itself. It became something else entirely. A case defined not by what was found, but by what was never found. Years passed. Then decades. The case of D.B. Cooper did not fade. It evolved from an active investigation into a permanent mystery, from a criminal case into a legend. Over time, hundreds of suspects were examined. Some seemed plausible. Others gained public attention through books, documentaries, and theories. But none could ever be confirmed. No fingerprint match. No verified confession. No physical identity tied conclusively to the man who boarded Flight 305. Only fragments of possibility. Never certainty. Some investigators believe the most likely outcome is also the simplest. That Cooper did not survive the jump. That the storm, the terrain, the altitude, and the conditions made survival impossible. In this view, the mystery is not where he went, but where he ended up. Somewhere in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. Never recovered. Never found. Others disagree. They argue the operation was too controlled, too calculated, too precise, to be the work of someone who did not know what they were doing. They believe he had training, experience, or knowledge of aircraft systems that gave him an advantage. But even that theory never led to a name. Only speculation. And then there is the most unsettling possibility of all. That he survived. That he escaped. That he lived the rest of his life in anonymity, blending into ordinary existence, never revealing himself, never speaking, never claiming what he had done. If true, it would mean the most famous skyjacking in American history ended not with capture, but with disappearance. In 2016, after more than 4 decades, the FBI officially suspended active investigation, not because the case was solved, but because it had reached a point where no new leads were emerging. The evidence was preserved, in case new physical proof ever appears. And so the case remains open in history, closed in action. More than 50 years later, one question still lingers. Did D.B. Cooper die in the wilderness below? Or did he walk away into the world as an ordinary man carrying an extraordinary secret? Some mysteries are solved. Others remain open forever. And a few become something else entirely. They become legend. This was Hidden Files.